You're listening to 94.4 FM, Salford City Radio, the Friday Sports Show. Your host, Jimmy Petruzzi. Bringing news from the local area and around the world. We're very fortunate this show to have interviewed some of the world's best coaches, athletes, sports people, footballers, you name it. They've been on the show and give us some invaluable insights into their profession. The main aim of the show is to increase awareness and participation. We aim to bring the world to Salford to the world. We interview people from around the world who give us perspectives on their sort of coaching and what they do. And we also have a segment featuring some of the world's most influential people in psychology and related fields. They're very kind to join us in the show and tell us about sort of their research and their perspective on the field of psych. Today we have a very special guest who's going to give insight into the world of goalkeeping coaching and no doubt a lot more. It's always interesting to speak to people in different roles. One of the roles that no doubt a lot of listeners will be fascinated in is sort of goalkeeping coaching. It's obviously a specialist role, and we'll get more an insight into what that actually involves, what a goalkeeping coach does. We have the head of Academy goalkeeping coach, Gage Walsh. Welcome to the show. Great to have you on board.
Hi, Jimmy. Thanks for that. Really appreciate it. I'm glad to be on here and speaking to you.
Yeah, no, great to have you on board, Gage. Just for the listeners, Gage, how did you sort of get into goalkeeping coaching? I mean, our listeners are probably wondering how you got into it. How did you actually get into goalkeeping coaching?
That's a really interesting story. To begin with, it starts from how I got into goalkeeping. To begin with, as a young lad, growing up in Australia, I didn't have a huge amount of sports clubs nearby. But when Australia made it to the 2006 World Cup, obviously making it to the round of 16 against Italy, and watching how well Mark Schwarzer played in that, that made me fall in love with goalkeeping. And then since then, I moved to England at 15, chasing a career in football. Long story short, had a few injuries, got offered head of academy goalkeeping at Liverpool Ladies, and I kind of just fell into it. And it wasn't until later in life that I realised that it is actually a huge passion of mine, and it's what I was meant to do. But originally falling into goalkeeper coaching was because I was playing a position. It was my role of expertise. So I would say I fell into it.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Gage. I mean, in terms of your experience, you mentioned that obviously little ladies. I mean, that's quite interesting. Obviously, seen the women's game grow in the last few years, particularly in the UK, and obviously success of the women's team in the UK last year. What was it like when you started working in the women's team? How sort of where was the game at that point? I know it's obviously putting on the spot, and there's a lot of variables, but in terms of yourself getting involved in the women's game, what was it like when you first got involved in the women's game?
Yeah, so obviously facilities, we were sharing Edgehill University with the university there on the AstroTurf in the evening. So when it comes to facilities, coaches, equipment, we weren't at the level as I'd expect them to be now. I would say recruitment-wise, it's very hard to get the recruitment right, because in England especially, I don't feel like there's very many young girls, especially before England has done so well in the last Women's World Cup and Euros. Not many young girls are wanting to dive around in the mud as a goalkeeper. So I think the biggest challenges I saw was in recruitment and trying to get the right people in the environment. But seeing the Lionesses do so well, I think that's only taking massive strides for the women's game.
Yeah, and absolutely. And in terms of your own career as a goalkeeping coach, obviously you sort of, you sort of would move in a different direction in terms of your career. And what would you say the challenges have been for yourself? I mean, you mentioned the 2006, that was an inspiration for you. Swartz, obviously, fantastic keeper. He's been there, he's done that. But what would you say for yourself the challenges have been to get to where you are today as a goalkeeping coach?
Well, one of the biggest ones for me was my whole life I'd committed to trying to be a professional goalkeeper. And one of the biggest hurdles for me was when that kind of got ripped away from me, when I had a few injuries, moved over here away from my family at a young age, and committed my whole life to this dream. When that got ripped away from me, and then coaching then felt like just something I fell into, something that I decided to go into so I didn't waste all those experiences. That was really tough for me. It wasn't until around 24, 25 when I had a real sit down and think about if coaching something I just fell into, or if it's actually what I was meant to do, and if it's what I want to do the rest of my life. And that for me was really groundbreaking for developing as a coach. I had to sit down and recognise what it is that I want to get out of life, and I realised that the biggest thing I love is helping people. As a goalkeeper thing, when I make a save, keeping the whole team in the game. When I'm training, I used to always love seeing the younger kids develop, used to help them to give them advice. So seeing how my action could impact others is something I was always passionate in. I love health and fitness. So every single day, as a goalkeeper coach, I got to be out on the grass working on my health and my fitness, and then just being able to help give my advice to others. It made me realise that goalkeeper coaching is actually what I'd love to do. It's what I was born to do. Having that realisation for me really helped me with my coaching, because a lot of players take the badges just in case as a bit of a plan B. A lot of players, if they're honest with themselves, don't see themselves as a coach, because as a player you do have to be quite selfish. So for me, the toughest challenge was once I was no longer a player, working out what I wanted to do with my life, and recognising if this was the career for me. And I'm now so happy for those injuries, because I prefer coaching over playing. I definitely get a lot more joy out of this than I ever did playing.
No, that's really fascinating, and I suppose for anyone listening, that's a big takeaway really, in terms of sitting down and sort of deciding what you want to do. It obviously sort of you sort of put your heart and and soul into becoming a professional goalkeeper. Then obviously sort of you make a decision to sort of go into coaching. And in terms of yourself, I mean, sort of making that decision, Gage, is it something that you sort of did on your own? Do you sort of have people to talk to? Or, I mean, to sort of, you obviously got to make your own decision in the end, but at that point when you sort of had to decide, do I sort of just go for the coaching side of it? Was it something that you sort of like just mull over yourself and decide, or did anyone sort of like, do you have a sounding board to talk to about it?
So my parents have been brilliant. So when I was back in Australia, my local club was 2.5 hours away. So they used to drive me 2.5 hours to training and then 2.5 hours back. So the 5-hour round trip, I used to do that 5 days a week. So straight away, the added pressure there was one thing, was the commitment my parents were making in me. So from the very start, they've invested in me from a time perspective. So it's always been a really good opportunity for me to speak to them about my career, about what I'm doing. I think in the back of my head, I always felt like I had to make it for them, because they're putting that much time and energy into you. If you don't make it, you're going to feel like you failed them. So for me, that was a huge sounding board, speaking to them, and just hearing from them that if I decided not to stay in football, that they wouldn't be disappointed, they wouldn't hold it against you. Because I think a lot of players do have those pressures, and if they don't make it as a player, then they feel like they need to use it as experiences as a coach, even if their personality doesn't suit coaching. Even if they're not passionate about coaching, they're still not falling into that role. So I think during COVID, having that chance to really sit down and have a look at where I ended up in my life, and have a real think about if I want to continue down this path. And it was a lot of nights sitting up and writing down what I want out of life, what I value, and writing down my values, what I care about most, what makes me happiest in life, which is developing other people, being in a social environment, being active. Writing all those down, and it wasn't financial, it was purely just, it was the active side, it was helping people develop, it was trying to help people be the best versions of themselves, and recognising that being a goalkeeper coach gives me all of that. That for me was a great thing. That's really helped me push on and invest even more time into my career.
Absolutely. No, that's really fascinating, Gage. And in terms of like yourself, obviously you've had the experience to play, and you've come over to the UK and you coached as well. And I think you're sort of well placed to maybe, I'm not, obviously it's hard to give any pointers or advice, but maybe some insights. We have an audience, a lot of people in Australia listen to the show as well. And in terms of any sort of young player listening to this sort of show, it doesn't necessarily have to be from Australia, even from the UK, from wherever in the world. But in terms of like anyone sort of listening, any sort of young player listening, in terms of thinking, okay, you know what, I think I've got something here, I'm going to have a go type thing. What are some things that they sort of need to take on board in terms of, like you mentioned there, you were training 5 times a week and putting the effort in, and you have to maintain that sort of discipline for a long time, really. But what are some of the sort of things that any sort of young player considering to sort of try and push themselves to go the extra level, be it semi-pro, be it pro? What are some things you think they need to take on board, Gage, in terms of maybe giving themselves the best chance possible?
I think the biggest thing is loving the sport.
Yeah.
What's the saying about the person that enjoys walking will get further than the person that loves the destination? So the biggest thing I would say is if you love the sport and you're obsessed with it, just enjoy the process, enjoy the development. Every time you do get a little bit better, just really enjoy that. Don't look at the end of the destination. Just really enjoy the journey. Because I do think, especially in this modern day, you've got agents approaching kids at 13, calling themselves advisors, and they start to professionalise it too early. In my experience, the lads that love it the most and really just enjoy the development side and enjoy the journey, I think you can't really go wrong.
Absolutely.
And then if it doesn't work out, you don't feel like you've wasted your time because you've enjoyed the process. Because those ones that are only in it for the end journey, especially the parents as well.
Yeah.
Like too much pressure on the kid. And then if it doesn't work out, they feel like they wasted the time. So for me, enjoy the journey, enjoy the process.
No, that's a great point, and I think obviously you're sort of testament to that, Gage, because you kind of sort of redeveloped your career into coaching, and I think the reality is, and this is one of the things I sort of tell players sometimes that, I don't mean it in a negative way. I mean it in a way that this the reality that I think the percentage of making it as a pro is, I don't know, 0.01. I read somewhere along them lines. That's not to sort of deter people to say, okay, well, give it your best shot, but obviously, like he says, it's important to really enjoy it and see where the road takes you. But do you think that some players maybe put too much pressure on themselves, sort of Gage, and not think, what, I've got this opportunity to give it a good go, and whatever happens. Maybe I've often thought some players kind of define themselves, their worth, from being maybe a footballer or a sports person, and like, would you suggest maybe to have other interests as well? I mean, obviously you're interested in coaching. Like any young players, it's sort of healthy for them to sort of think about and have other interests too, if it's not education or something different as well, to sort of maybe focus on too.
I think that's extremely important. I speak to quite a few of my mates who are still playing at the moment, and they speak about it quite often, about how easy it is to make your identity your job. So a lot of footballers, when they go, so who are you? What do you do? The first thing they say is, I am a footballer, or I am a football coach. When the problem with that is, let's say you're not doing well, like you're not playing well as a football player. All of a sudden, you attach your worth to your qualities as a footballer. You go, I'm a footballer and I'm not playing well, therefore I'm not good. Or as a coach, you're not in a good rhythm, you're not in a good routine, and all of a sudden you start coaching poorly, or you don't believe in your abilities anymore. All of a sudden your whole life feels like it's not good or it's not going well. I think it's really important to separate the two, separate the identity and the profession. I think it's really hard to do that in a profession where you have to be so obsessed with it. Football, the competition is so high. Every minute, every hour of the day is almost dedicated to this one sport. It's very hard not to attach your identity with that.
Absolutely.
So big things I would definitely recommend is just having passions outside of football, recognising that your passion isn't you, and having things outside. The way the game is going, how tactical it is, how cognitively challenging it is. Having hobbies outside of it, especially multi-sports, I think are actually great ways to develop
absolutely,
skills within the game, develop problem solving, develop the way you see the game, and it's just taking a break away from the football.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of your own sort of highlights, Gage, know that you've had like your number of highlights. Obviously, sort of working at the club you're at the moment, it's a fantastic club. A great club, well-respected club. In terms of your own sort of highlights, what would you say some of the highlights that you've had in your own career to date?
My biggest highlights have been working with some of the professionals I've worked with. So one of my biggest highlights was within my first 2 weeks of working at Bournemouth. Billy Mercer, who was the first-team goalkeeper coach at the time, and Craig Mawson, who's currently Man United's first-team goalkeeper coach, but he was the head of academy goalkeeping, trusted me to take Nick Pope for a pre-season friendly against Kidderminster.
Brilliant.
And I was 20 at the time, and I'm taking him for his pre-match warm-up, absolutely fearing imposter syndrome, not believing I'm good enough, looking around going, what the hell am I doing here?
Yeah.
So for me, that was massive. Only a season or two later, working with Joe Hart, when he had a game the day before, just doing like a match day +1 with him, and then with Nick Pope with his shoulder injury, just helping him with his rehab and doing one-on-one sessions with him. There's been a lot of big highlights like those for me. kind of makes you pinch yourself from a young lad that came from a small coastal town in Australia.
Yeah.
Working with some of the biggest goalkeepers in England. Those are huge highlights for me.
Brilliant, that's fantastic, and yeah, that's sort of really really fascinating. Then listeners that was listening in thinking that sort of really is, and obviously sort of look, I think it's one of them, and I think that obviously. It is tough in one thing to be a player, but obviously to work on coaching staff. It's got its own sort of challenges that we sort of spoke about before too. But to do that is amazing, Gage. I think it really is. And in terms of the your own influences, you mentioned obviously sort of watching sports as a player, and there's not too many better keepers than Swartz, to be fair, that have come out of Australia, and in the Premier League it was phenomenal. But as a coach, what would you say your influences have been up to this point from a coaching perspective?
Well, so for me, I've been very, very fortunate with the coaches that I've worked with at Burnley. First of all, with Billy Mercer and Craig Mawson, who I've already mentioned.
Yeah.
Billy Mercer was the first team goalkeeper coach. Craig Mawson was head of academy goalkeeping. Billy Mercer has been so open and allowing me to work around the first team day in, day out.
Yeah.
Craig Mawson, getting to watch the way he works for morals. He was the best I've ever seen for just making sure to do things right.
Wow.
So he was such a good influence. Once he left, a goalkeeper coach named Fabian Ante.
Yeah.
And anyone that is involved with goalkeeping will know that name.
Yeah.
He's now gone to Borussia Mönchengladbach as their first goalkeeper coach. And he's a scholar with goalkeeping. Some of the papers that he releases is just, it's outstanding, some of his work. So I was lucky enough to work around him. And then previously, Vincent Company's come in and brought Yeller. And Yeller has opened my mind to what goalkeeper coaching can be. I think the way he's working at the moment is going to be the way most goalkeeper coaches will be working in the next 10 to 15 years. I just think we're in a transitional moment where he is at the forefront of something very new and very exciting.
Yeah.
So being fortunate enough to work with so many different coaching styles has been, it's been absolutely brilliant. So for me, they've been the biggest influences on my coaching style and the way I work today.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Gage. I sort of find that really fascinating because you mentioned obviously the next 10, 15 years, and we've seen the game sort of change from obviously you know a lot more than me, but looking from the outside in, from a goalkeeping perspective, we've seen sort of the game change, whether it's sort of the goalkeeper's role in distribution and being able to sort of play almost with some teams be a sweeper, for want of a better word, to be able to join in. And has that been a big thing in terms of sort of coaching as well, where we're seeing a whole new, obviously it's been done before, but we've seen the last few years things definitely accelerate in terms of the sort of the goalkeeping role, really. Where do you sort of see it going yourself in the next 10, 15 years or so? Is it going to be more of the same? Is it going to be, where do we sort of go from here? We sort of see, teams selecting keepers because they've got the ability to distribute the ball, to be able to, pass the ball back to them, and, not just their keeping ability, but their footballing ability. Where do you sort of see the game going in the future?
See, I've got a very strong opinion on this. I see the way that goalkeeper coach's role in the club is going to change so dramatically. I believe we're going to be a lot more involved in the setup of a team, in the build-up, in the defensive unit, how we work as a team.
Yeah.
A goalkeeper coach is no longer going to be wearing the goalkeeper gloves in a session. It's going to be an outfield coach, a team coach, utilising the keeper within the sessions. I do believe the days of the keepers in the corner working on defending the goal is going to be behind it. And I believe if you look at the involvement of the keeper in a game, the actual shot stopping side is such a small percentage. So many factors are involved with defending the goal. You need the defenders to let a ball to, you need the opposition to get a decent shot on target, and there's not to go in for you to actually defend it. If you look at actions in a game, defending the goal is probably the least likely action. First of all, I look at their on-pitch presence and personality. So I think how they hold themselves, how they communicate with their backline, that's the first thing they can control the most. And then after that, it's the in-possession play. The next most way can affect the game is the in-possession, how many times they touch the ball, can they break lines with their passes, can they towards the opposition out, if they step back, can they pick out passes higher up the pitch if they decide to press. Then next after that, I think defending the space is the next priority. So how well can you come for through balls, can you sweep, can you come for crosses? And then the last thing that you do the least in a game is actually defend the goal. So I think the whole way goalkeepers are trained to when you sit on the side. I think the priority is so much on the last action that they do. And even though they are most of the time the biggest moments, they're the least consistent moments in a game.
That's really interesting. And it's like your role, for example. I know obviously there's a lot to your role, Gage, but just generally, say the role that you like a role you have now, in terms of like goalkeeping coaching. Do you kind of like are you sort of in terms of the physical testing of the keepers and other aspects as well? And does analysis play a role? I mean, have things like that sort of come into the game in terms of, like, let's say for example the development of the keeper you mentioned there? I mean, how does that generally work in terms of developing the keeper? Do you have separate people doing separate things, for example, maybe like doing some fitness testing with the keeper and that sort of stuff, or is that sort of done by yourself?
Yeah, so it's the teams that we have in football clubs are absolutely brilliant now. So you do have a specialist in everything. You have a GPS specialist, you have an in-gym specialist, you have your physios working on their range of movement. So those testing are done by the support staff.
Yeah.
And they're done by professionals. Now, me personally, I'm very passionate about that side of the game.
Yeah.
So I'm currently doing my UKFCA at the moment.
Brilliant.
I'm trying to get my PT done, which I know personal trainers aren't really helpful in the football club, but just to give me a better knowledge of the S&C side of the game.
Yeah.
Because I did look at the statistics of the average jump of an NBA player compared to a professional goalkeeper. And considering they're on average another 3 to 4 inches taller, their vertical jump is still quite a lot bigger than the average goalkeeper.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah.
So if you look at that, the amount of additional games we can still get out of our goalkeepers physically is absolutely huge. And I do think the physical side in the past 20 years has been neglected a lot for goalkeepers.
Yeah.
And I think looking at myself as a goalkeeper coming from Australia, where the physical side was prioritised a lot. In the fitness runs, when I was at Southport, I used to get towards the top of the group. Even with YT, when I was a YT, I was always towards the top of the group in the fitness and jump scores. And I do think it's something that can be neglected quite easily. I do see a lot of value to.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. In terms of what about the psychological side, Gage? I mean, we briefly spoke off air about the psychology of the game. I mean, one thing about sort of keepers for me, obviously, the amount of contact that outfield players have is quite limited. But in terms of the keeper itself, the keeper's in a situation where it kind of fascinates me really, because that they can be sort of out of the game in the sense that not involved directly. But obviously there's a lot of communicating to do, and then to be able to concentrate at the right times. And why do you see the psychological part of the game in terms of being able to switch on at the right moment, be it a set piece, or if a shot just comes out of nowhere, a bit too much space, and just to be able to stay switched on for that over 90 minutes game. What do you see the psychology side of the game for keepers going?
So the way Yellow's been a huge influence in that is the kind of person that firmly. So I think the way goalkeeper coaching sessions are designed will completely change because there's a priority on that. I think most of the game, a goalkeeper shouldn't be switched off during the game, because I see a goalkeeper as the coach on the pitch, the one that sees the whole game, that can organise from the back to front. I want the goalkeeper to be just as tactically aware as I am. There's no voice on the pitch. Because when I'm watching a game, I'm not switching off from minute 1 to minute 90 as a coach. Constantly seeing if there's a threat when they get the ball, constantly seeing where the spaces are when we've got the ball, constantly seeing how we can hurt them and build up. And I think as a goalkeeper, they should be exactly the same. Working out who their weak links is in their build-up, seeing how we can organise a cross. And I don't believe there is space for us to switch off during the game. In case of switching off and then switching on, I don't really think that should be a part of the game. So within goalkeeper sessions, making sure that everyone's thinking. So making sure you're designing sessions where it's not just the keeper and goal that's having a thinking, where it's the servers included, which obviously takes a lot more time in the session design, but I find it a lot more fulfilling and rewarding. And it makes you realise how easy it is for them to switch off on the side. When you've got the session going and one action means another trigger, which means that a server has to do a certain action, it definitely makes you realise how easy it's given them the right to just stand on the side and volley when they say go. I think the way that we design sessions can dramatically help their information capacity during a match and how much they can take on board in important moments.
Absolutely, and I suppose these days you've got the game analysis, and it's obviously it's a lot easier now to access information on opposition players and analyse sort of where their strengths and weaknesses are, and amongst a number of things really. I mean, I suppose this sort of technology is definitely sort of having an impact in the game in terms of like how things are done, and how much of a role has technology sort of played for yourself in terms of you can sort of provide analysis, and but equally I suppose sort of going forward, then that presents an opportunity for the opposition too to think, okay, well, if they're going to take a penalty, the keeper's maybe stronger, I can strike the ball in this direction. I know obviously it's an unconscious process, but sort of consciously these things sort of come up in a game, Gage, in terms of training, like the analysis, that have a big role to sort of play going forward.
Yeah, I believe that's why the game's getting very tactical.
Yeah.
I believe is because we have so much information to access. So we know the play style of oppositions. We know who's going to be playing the week before they play most of the time. So there's so much information available to us that both teams have. It becomes a case of which team can use the information most effectively.
Absolutely.
In a short amount of time, and technology helps you do that. I believe technology is just a case of getting as much information as possible, as effectively as possible. The technology is used very, very often. Even cases of watching sessions back using drones instead of videos and instead of iPods, allowing us to see the intricate details of the movement of the backline and getting better angles when we're watching the sessions back. VR headsets, being able to relive moments that have happened in a game and seeing what we could have done differently and putting the plays exactly where they were, exactly at set distances, and seeing if we could make different decisions. Looking at how a team presses with the Oculus on, and looking at where the gaps might be in person instead of from the gantry. So the way we can utilise technology now is incredible, and it's only getting further and further.
No, definitely, absolutely. And in terms of yourself, sort of Gage your sort of like vision. Obviously, I know you got your own goals, and don't only share where you're comfortable. Obviously, a fantastic club at the moment, an amazing club, a great opportunity, obviously, to sort of at a fantastic club. But for yourself, it's just a question of more of the same, keep going, and sort of do as much as you can to help produce help the keepers fulfil their potential, basically.
Yeah, I think a huge passion of mine, because of where I've come from, is I'd love to learn as much as I can out in England, go at the very highest level I can possible. But I'd love to bring all this information back to Australia, because I do look at my development as a goalkeeper, and I didn't always have the best coaches around. Luckily, I did have Jim Fraser, incredible with me, and then Ken Greenwood, who was one of the coaches there as well. So outside of that, I've never really had the best of coaching. And that's no fault to their own. I had some coaches that cared so much about me. But I just think that the information and the quality I had growing up meant that when I did come out here, I was playing catch up. And even though I had a lot of desire and I defended the goal well, all the things I'm talking about today about ways to defend the space, ways to affect opposition in possession, I just believe that all the skill sets I'm using now and learning, I would love to come back to Australia one day and help with the country education and goalkeeping, and go into a role within Australia. But while I'm out here, I feel like I've got a great opportunity. I'm still at a very good age where I'm learning a lot. I feel like I've got an opinion that can really help a lot of goalkeepers. I've had a lot of good influences around me. I've been very blessed to have some very good goalkeeper coaches around me. So I feel like I have a lot to offer Bournemouth and wherever I end up in the future.
Absolutely. That's the sort of, for sure. I think one thing's for sure, you definitely sort of have an open mind and a desire to sort of want to do well, and I think that's sort of, obviously sort of huge, and to be able to transfer that knowledge onto sort of any young keeper coming through. But I mean, not just a keeper. I think generally speaking, I'm sure there's sort of players who outfield players who will benefit from speaking to you too, Gage, in terms of just even if it's sort of bouncing a few ideas and whatever else really. But it's been fantastic speaking to you, mate. It's been really interesting. I'm sure the listeners have really enjoyed it. That's for sure. There's been certainly a lot of takeaways for our listeners in terms of an insight into how you got to where you are, and obviously some of the insights in terms of training too. It's been great to join us, Gage. Really enjoyed speaking to you, so I want to thank you very much.
That was Gage Walsh, Head of Academy Goalkeeping at Bournemouth Football Club, who was kind enough to join us on the Salford City Radio 94.4 FM, the Friday Sports Show. Your host, Jimmy Petruzzi.